Welcome to the Stories Are Soul Food podcast, presented by Cannonball Books, the kids' fiction imprint of Cannon Press.
So I followed the ghost of a king with every step. I tried to see beyond for a trace of the riverside, but restlessness was my pride.
This is a prank call show now.
Hello.
Mr. Radford.
Hello.
How are you, sir?
Howdy,
Good.
Dave.
How you doing, man? Hey, Brian.
This is Stories Are Soul Food, episode 693, Colin.
Wow. I was actually just on your podcast app here, looking at all the titles. I have to say, in 693, you said?
No, I have no idea what number it is.
Oh, okay.
That's strictly
whoa.
inaccurate.
I'm a writer of fiction.
Okay, got it. I found out about this podcast 4 days ago on I don't know
and
how
I thought you were a friend. And I thought
Yeah.
you were a friend. This is terrible.
Oh, man.
It's funny. I just found out about your music yesterday.
Savage. I've known about both of you for a long time. There we go.
There we go. Brian's the peacemaker.
Yeah, and it's like, how do you tell somebody that is close to you that you have okay, so I was on a phone call with a friend of mine who's a fan of our music, is like followed us for years, and he was talking to me on the phone about, we're just kicking around ideas, and he's like, I would love if you did a podcast and talked about songwriting and your process and all this. And I didn't have the heart to tell him that I was 6 months into releasing a series of episodes on me writing and my process and all of this. It's like, at what point do you just be like,
oh, it's terrible.
Just let it go.
Well, hey,
but anyway,
I want to formally introduce you first.
Yeah.
We
before
just
get
jumped
going.
right in because it's like, hey, it's David Radford, everybody. This is David Radford, lead songster of the Grey Havens.
Yep.
This is the guy, the Grey Havens, one of my, I'm not lying, favorite musical groups.
There you go.
There you go. Really, really
Thank you so
like
much.
their music. They're frickin-tastic. We can say that on this podcast. It's our podcast. I also find myself occasionally sending him bottles of bourbon in exchange for musical licenses.
This is true.
Because I really frequently need his songs to go with pretty pictures. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, thank you.
Really, the Grey Havens is, you put out fantastic stuff, and you have a bone to pick with us first. So David texted me while I was sitting in a grocery store parking lot. It was one of those moments when I was a perfectly timed moment for engagement, because I was sitting in a grocery store parking lot waiting for my wife. And you hadn't texted me then. I think I just saw it then. There was an audio message, and I was waiting, and there was this long 2-minute message from you with a couple questions about a podcast episode about movies, which we're going to grind today, and then also a bone to pick about music. So let's start with that. Let's start with this. Let's start with the bone to pick.
Okay, yeah. So in your most recent episode, Nightmares in Jane Austen, I haven't listened to the episode yet, but
such a good episode.
I'm pumped. The intro music has changed. So I'm starting from the beginning. And I noticed in the beginning that the intro music was epic with strings and horns, and what I felt was like.
Were they real horns though? Were they real?
I don't know, but my text to you was, so halfway through the season something changed, and I said, I'm not sure how you guys went from epic intro music with horns and strings at the start, and are now somehow being introed with soft acoustics, glockenspiel, and two guys singing "ooh" in harmony. Please be ready to defend this on the show.
And I said I would not. I do have to take responsibility though, because I think at some point, not being a listener to my own podcast, I did not know what we were.
You let it go.
We were not introing to.
Yeah.
And I complained that we had faux Narnia music.
Yep.
And heckled the production team. And
they made a pivot that apparently Nate also has not listened to.
I have still not listened to, but I did play some Johnny Flynn, the theme from Detectorists.
Yeah.
Which is
I just watched that series.
Such a great show. And,
it is.
And the theme is fantastic. The little song is great. So I played that and I was like, this is what I want our
Yeah.
theme to be.
Yeah.
And then I didn't pay any attention. And
But you guys may like to know, speaking of bottles of bourbon, I reached out to Johnny Flynn's licensing and was told $3,000 per episode for 30 seconds.
Wow.
So
Brian,
that didn't
Brian
happen.
is so bad at this. So bad. At
So
this.
I expect from here on out $3,000 bottles of whiskey.
Hey, I've sent you some pretty good whiskey.
No, you have. I'm
here's
kidding.
what I'm going to say right now. This is because you criticized our Glockenspiel. I want to know, can we please play Ghost of the King, a little Ghost of a
Yes,
King bumper? at the
100%.
beginning? Get it. There we go.
Okay.
We'll use
Wow.
Ghost. We'll use Ghost of a King from now on. We'll
Done
do
deal.
little Ghost of a King bumper as we go into Stories of Soul Food, starting
Man.
with this episode.
Okay.
I'm
This
so
episode,
pumped.
you hear that, production team?
Daniel,
Ghost
this is
of a
for
King.
you.
Pay attention.
I'm so pumped.
And
Man,
it's
thank you so much.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
There's no bourbon for this one, by the way.
Okay, all good.
unless you show up in Idaho, in which case
Yeah, no, you're good.
I'll pour you the bourbon of your choice.
You're
So
good.
that
I'm
we got
actually
that.
enjoying.
That's
one
what
right
that's
now.
really what I wanted to accomplish. I wanted you to pick that bone so that I could ask for that song. By the way,
Okay.
this was all a
Deal.
tiger trap. This was a tiger trap.
That's perfect.
Okay, back to you.
Okay, well, it's okay if I ask the question that I asked in the voice message?
Yeah, do it.
Okay, so I listened to your episode, or one of your episodes on movies, and so my situation is I have a 6, almost 7-year-old
Which is
son named Simon.
Which is nuts.
I know, it's crazy. And as you gave a couple examples of questions that you were asking your kids as they were watching movies with you to, teach them how to be in a position of authority, I think, when it comes to movies.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
not just taking everything, lock, stock, and barrel, or just as it's told, but having sort of a internal vetting process or a filter that
Yep.
they can put in place for, okay, is what I'm taking in true and good and beautiful, and if not, how do I think about those things? And I heard all that and thought, okay, I think that's really good. The questions that you gave were, hey, do you like this character? Maybe for an intro, like, and if they're struggling to answer why or why not, or if they're still not answering, like, well, I like this character because of this, and obviously I don't like that they're doing this, and would love the character more if they did this, X, Y, Z. And my thought to that was, how do you think about sort of the dance between just being able to be immersed in a story, and then stepping outside of that story by pressing pause on the video player and asking a question, and then re-entering that as a way for them to consume or engage with stories. How is there at all a concern? The question went in my mind, is there at all a concern about taking away their ability to sit in a story and kind of be enchanted? And, I've heard interviews of you, and I steal this from you sometimes. I think you were being interviewed by Joe Rigney at Bethlehem. And he said, what are you trying to do with story? And I steal your answer everywhere I go. And one of the things that you said was, I want to awaken wonder.
Oh.
And I'm not sure if that's still the answer you give,
Yep.
but is there a sense in which we are, I think you know what I'm asking, are we taking away, does that take away to some degree of the wonder that you as the filmmaker, as the author, as the writer are trying to evoke in your readers and your viewers and listeners, and how do you, because that's my only fear is just the dance between, okay, I don't want them to, and it's like, I think I mentioned it in the audio voice memo, it's like C.S. Lewis's essay on meditations in a tool shed.
Yeah.
He looks at the beam of light in a dark tool shed, but then he steps into the beam's, viewpoint, and he looks along the beam, And those are two very different experiences. And no one, so one is thinking about the light beam and one is just experiencing it. And I think he ends the essay by saying, you know, you need both. One isn't necessarily superior over the other in life. But I guess my fear is something he mentioned in the essay is looking at a movie or a story as merely a something to be contemplated, you know, merely something to be deconstructed or thought more cerebrally about, as opposed to just, you know, having like that kid heart, wide-eyed wonder, enthusiasm for just being enchanted by a story for a little while.
Yeah,
I think that question is.
I think it's a great question, and it actually is. It's a huge can of worms, and it's a huge discussion because it's absolutely not merely a thing to be analyzed and contemplated.
Right.
It's not. But there's so much to talk about here, so we'll kind of unpack it in different directions, and you can kick it back and jump in whenever. But basically, I think that overall, if we train our kids well and wisely, then they will be a much tougher crowd with a far more refined palate, and their appreciation for great art will also be greatly heightened. And so while they won't be swept away by any old Marvel movie, when they are approached with great art, when they do sit down and watch a great film, it will affect them far more, with far more impact than it would have otherwise, because there's so much more amazement. Like there is a lot more wonder there because it has cleared all these hurdles that they have, that these popcorn movies can't. And so I think one of the most important things especially for little kids, is to not be purely passive. When it comes to consuming art, we can't say to our children, get into vans with strangers. Just take candy from strangers. Just be passive. Like just let it happen to you. Just let it happen. Like, no, none of us want that. That's not what we want. What we want is for them to be active. We want them to be actively engaged in the creative process. We want them to have active imaginations and to be actively communing in that artistic experience. And they can't do that if they turn their minds off. If they turn their minds off, they're just flotsam. They're just floating on the waves. They're not swimmers in the waves. And a swimmer in the waves really knows the power and the force of those waves a lot more than just a stick does. You know, like it really, and so you as a songwriter, I mean, I think you know the parts of a song, you know how to deconstruct a song pretty rapidly. And I don't think that sophistication, and I'd venture to say that sophistication and your abilities has not made you appreciate greatness less. You know, when you encounter greatness in a song, like really, really profound musical ability, it doesn't impact you less than it would have if you had not developed all your skill set. Having developed your skill set enables you to be far more amazed and far more filled with wonder when somebody achieves something truly profound that your average person on the street couldn't tell the difference between that and a commercial jingle.
Yeah, I'm reminded of the proverb that says it's the glory of a king to search out a matter. That it's not a king getting deep into something and understanding all of its work actually doesn't remove from the thing itself. It adds glory.
Yeah, when it's really magnificent, to explore it only unpacks more wonders. You know, like it just, so I do agree with you. I really do agree with you that there's a lot of people, and I think in the more academically rigorous, say homeschool circles, classical Christian education circles, we can be really educationally minded, academically minded. And so we think when we've sat back and analyzed a philosophical element in a piece of art that we've somehow engaged with it. True. And I think that is stepping exactly into the fault that you've kind of cautioned against when you're just stepping outside and trying to dissect a cat, and then when you've cut it apart on a table, you think you know cats when you've never seen one run up a tree and run out a limb. You've never actually seen that. So I think that there is a real pit there. There is a real trap there that is overly academic, overly analytical. But when you take your 6-year-old and you say just a very simple question, what should he have done? You're not pausing the movie. At the end, you sit down and you say, we just watched this, and now you're getting a scoop of ice cream, and we're going to talk about it. You're going to activate your brain, and we're actually going to develop the imaginative habit of engagement, of judgment, and not have you be passive. Like the consumption of art is not just you, the passive recipient, getting tossed in a van and driven wherever. This is you having communed with something, and then afterwards you're going to actually work through it. You're going to process it, and you're going to think about it. So when you're little, it can be, very, very little, little baby food. And you're talking about, what did the character do? You're just asking them to remember it. Just recall for me what that character did. What could that character have done? And which thing did they choose? They're still very much inside the art. They're not thinking like the creator yet. They're thinking like the character. Like, what were the choices? What could that character have done?
Yeah, for my guys, was that brave? Like helping them understand that was actually a very brave thing to do. And
was that brave or was that cowardly?
Right. And just thinking, would you be able to run back to the monster? For my 6-year-old, is kind of the level that
would you run back to the monster? Like that kind of like apply it to your life. That kind of thing. Just recall, have your memory activated. Like, are you thinking about the story that you just watched? So it's less about, can you take it apart? Can you cut it into pieces, and can you label it all? Can you tell me that it was nihilism, or can you tell me that this is straight from Kierkegaard?
Yeah.
It's more, is your brain on? Are you a swimmer in the sea, or are you just floating?
I'm reminded every year, and Nate, I'm sure you remember, there are some students in the freshman rhetoric class that have a really heavy dose of debate and worldview training. And I often hit them with poetry because it's stretching part of their brain that they haven't had to analyze stuff with. I mean, I love that they can analyze a worldview, but I often find that they need to be pushed in alternate ways of meaning besides the syllogism. So the other proofs besides just logos, they're also being pushed with character proofs and pathos and emotion. And I find sometimes just what you're saying is that for them is really good because they know they're argument people, but they haven't been pushed in emotion or beauty so far, and they aren't quite sure what to do with it.
So I think that you're right, though, David. If you tried to listen to a song with somebody who constantly paused it, and there's a time and a place for that, where like in a particular classroom setting, but if you're constantly pausing it versus trying to train the memory so that afterward you're saying describe it for me, describe the movements of it, describe the progression, the shape of the song. Like, were people active? And I think that's really, excuse me, I think that's really huge. I think that's absolutely huge. And so the goal is for my own kids to, when they hit a really good film, a really good book, for them to have a level of appreciation that significantly surpasses the appreciation they would have had if they were just an average American teenager. And so with the film Don't Look Up, for example, and it's funny, we have plenty of people that I know who've just written it off, where it's just like, oh, it's just this, climate change, anti-right wing, like, we're in Idaho, like that's just a lefty, whatever. I have 2 kids at least who have it in their top 3 now. Or like, that's an amazing film, and
filtered,
nudity cut. But at the same time, they are not at all blind to various political points or worldview movements, but the shape of the film, the patience of the film, and the way that the faith of one particular character is presented in that film, really blew them away, like really hit them hard. And so they see right past these triggers that have made lots of their friends think, oh, that's just MSNBC. And, my kids are they're plenty Idahoan. They're just as theocratic and libertarian as the next crazy right
the rest of us.
But it's politically they would be, lovers of the Constitution. Grateful for the nation they live in. Love the red, white, and blue, and the 4th of July and apple pie like everybody else. But they're not. It's not like they're lefties, but they're not flinching at seeing some left perspective. And seeing that perspective, seeing that political or philosophical perspective is not blinding them to the craft and the artistry that went into the making of this particular story. So because they are more sophisticated, they can see past some of the surface sprinkles that trigger people earlier. So it's not to say they agree with everything about it, but they really still are. It's a movie that they have now, all of them repeatedly made people sit down and watch. Like they've actually made their friends sit down and watch this. And, I'll have them, they've made promises to other parents, and then they'll be like, Dad, could you set filters? I'm making this group watch this in the basement or whatever. And I'm like, oh, there's still stuff from last time. This is something. They really want other people to see the progression of that particular film. And there's so much wisdom in it. There's a lot of strange wisdom in that satire. So
I'm wondering if an example of a kid one would be kind of Wall-E.
Yeah.
There's a very overt sort of way you could take, hey, we turned the planet into trash and
bad man. Man is bad.
Man is bad. We ruined the planet.
Yeah.
But if you stopped watching Wall-E just because you didn't like the opening scene, I think that would be silly.
Yeah. And I think you could also look at it personally. I look at it and knowing that those guys planned on making a movie in which there were no people and it was just the robots and robot expressions the entire time. It just makes me a little sad because I really want to watch that movie. I want to watch
because they added the people.
Because I really do love all the interactions between the robots
and the cockroach. Yeah.
And I'm really curious how they would have executed that. So there's plenty of little things to explore, but I think your general question of, is it a mistake just to overly analyze and become too intellectual and too academic and taking things apart and staring at it? Absolutely. That could be a mistake. And I've seen it done many, many times. And the fallacy of composition is committed often, where people take something apart and then identify its parts and think that it is that, they've now identified the whole somehow, where it's like, this is man is mostly water. It's like, it's that kind of thing. They take a movie apart, they take a novel apart, and they think that they've, they think they know something about the whole because they've pointed something out about the parts. I'm
reminded.
So
I'll go for it.
Oh, go ahead.
No, you go for it, Dave.
I was gonna say. So I loved your guys' episode on Pixar's existential dread.
Yeah.
And just to use this as an example here. So the lights turned on for me when I heard you guys talk about how these movies are all dealing with really intense sort of adult crisis themes.
Yeah.
Of being forgotten by your kids, just this existential dread. And okay, so I wonder then, just take Finding Nemo as a case study. How your questions after the film, you guys are having a scoop of ice cream, how your questions would shift from just having watched that with your 7-year-old or just having watched that with your 12-year-old. Like, to what, you know what I mean? Like, is there a because the questions you gave in your examples, which were great, are sort of helping them turn their brains on and be an active listener. Yeah. Just recall what happened. What would you have done? Was that brave? Those types of questions. At what point are you introducing questions like, what was the character arc here? Yeah. What was the director's vision for this? What do you think that they were trying to say with this movie? Those types of more, I don't know, what you would call it, analytical.
Yeah.
Or
I think 12 is actually right about where I would do it. And so I have a 12-year-old right now, and she's my youngest. And with her, and Nemo, for, to use that as a concrete example, would be very much like, let's talk about this particularly. What jumped out at you? What did you notice about the relationship? And, what did Nemo learn? What did Marlin learn? And what are they trying to tell you, based on those lessons? Now, contrast that with the turtles. What are they trying to teach Marlin by means of the turtles?
Mm.
Let him fly solo. And talk to her about that and call out different things. Like notice this scene and notice that character. And what are the directors and the writers saying about Marlin with the other characters? And then once we've, kind of picked it up, is it true? Is it good? Is that interesting? Is that a godly thing? Is this a biblical thing? And then also from here, kind of stretch your brain a little bit and be like, how does this compare to their other films? So can you think about their other movies? Have you seen anything like this in their other films? Are you picking up a pattern? Compare and contrast. So what do you learn about this one from the others? And start by what do you observe in this individual character arc just on its own? Nemo goes from where to where as a character. Marlin goes from where to where as a character. Which side characters are important on that journey? What lessons do they teach them? And then at the end, once you've kind of analyzed all that, you'd be like, oh, interesting. And do you think this is true? Is this important? Should Nemo have touched the butt at the beginning? Should Marlin have been so freaked out at the beginning? It's like, and the movie is kind of just saying they're both wrong, right? They're both wrong, and they both learn. And so when you take that and you say, okay, so now let's bounce around. Let's bounce around in the other movies. Are there similarities? And Pixar is pretty dissimilar in what they do. So what other stories does this remind you of? What other characters does this remind you of? And who does this remind you of in life? Like when you look around the world, what does this remind you of? What Bible stories does this remind you of? Does God tell stories like this? Like, do you see this in the world?
Yeah.
There's anything that you can do to kick the walls sideways out in their imaginations and help them start making lateral connections and start seeing patterns that way creatively is really good.
Yeah. If you, well, go for it.
No, I was just going to ask, what were you going to say, Brian?
Oh, I was going to add, mine are all 9 and below. So I don't feel like we're quite at that stage for yet. It is still the more simple questions, but when you start looking at it with the full on literary analysis, you're looking at if art is what makes us human. In a sense, both Marlin and Nemo are reacting because they've had something really terrible happen, which is something the kids gloss over, the loss. It starts with loss, and that's what kind of kickstarts. And the fact that they've both lost somebody is what sort of leaves them needing to change. And you can kind of go that route, but like I said, I haven't done that for my guys. It's been much more simple.
And I add that this sounds terrible, but I think it's really important when they're 10 to 12 and even 13. It's really important that they establish this pattern of discussion and wrestling with this with you, and it's fun. It's way more important that they do this and you kick the walls out sideways and that it's enjoyable and they try to make these connections and they try to find all the Easter eggs and find all those connections between this film and the other film and the book they just read and Bible stories and God stories and other stuff. It's more important that they go on that hunt with you and that you enjoy it together than that they do it correctly or find the right answers. Now you want to move into finding the right answers, but if you're unleashing them and they're trying to find, maybe there's 700 possible things and they find 3, and it's like, okay, that's a great first step. Like you obviously have room to grow and you're going to keep going. What you don't want to do is be affirming lots of random incorrect things. It's totally fine to be coming up short, as long as the experience is enjoyable and they're starting on the road. What you don't want to do is start validating lots of like false projections, where they're connecting things. You want to push against any place where they're stretching or they're overstretching or they're, like that's going to be an impulse, especially 12, 13, and, those younger years. This was just like this other situation with, Icarus. And it's like, well, you just read that in class, so I understand why you grabbed that. But explain that to me. Like push it, like put them on the spot, make them work for it.
That's good. Because you're always tempted to be like, yeah, good job. That's totally right.
and then be like, I don't know about that one. I'm not sure. I don't buy that quite. It's like it's good to not let them just think that every answer is correct, but the hunt is correct. Like, it's not an F, it's not bad job, it's not C-. It's like, no, this whole thing is correct. This whole wrestling thing we're doing, this whole hunt we're on is correct. This is growth. This is pleasure. This is us having a meal together. Like, this is us communing over an artistic experience together. And that is correct. That's soul food. That's what it is. We're eating and we're feeding our imaginations. Now, so but you do want to push against it. So it's not every answer is right, but you don't have to find every right answer. They don't have to find every right answer. You don't have to find every right answer. You just have to start eating together. So, imagine being a family where somebody's telling you, you guys should have meals together. And if you overly stressed out about the quality of the food the first couple times, you'd be like, you know what? Actually, it's the sitting down and the breaking bread together that's really the most important thing. Doing that with gratitude and enjoying that communion together is so much more important. And it will grow. It will go somewhere. Like it'll continue to progress. So I think it's really important for whoever's moderating, dad or mom or older sibling, to kind of provide some resistance, and not let older sibling just be snarky with that resistance, but to provide some resistance. Every answer is not right, but the whole experience is pleasurable for everybody. It's pleasurable for everybody as we all hunt for these things together. And that go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. When you are having these discussions, am I right in thinking, the way that you've sort of talked about it is the communal, let's all sit around and discuss what we just watched after the film. Are you ever interjecting, as you're watching the film together? Are you ever
sometimes, but
saying,
pretty rarely. That's very rare. There's some times that I'll do that, but it's when I think it's way past their, maybe not way past, but it's a little past their level of difficulty right now to pick up on. And I want them just to see it. I'm not explaining it. I'm just like, hey, notice that. And then I'm going to, and I keep going. And then later on, I'll be, we're done. I'll be like, hey, so that thing I told you to notice, what was it? Do you remember what it was? And then what do you think that was? What was that about? Why was that there? And then we'll kick around. And so actually even there, I've done that on like a second watching. So take a movie like I Am Legend, actually. So with I Am Legend, you watch this scary with some, young teenagers. I don't remember if it's got filters or not, but I really like this movie. I showed it to in a theater. I showed it to my son's junior high birthday party. All guys, and the number of guys who on a big screen, big 28-foot screen, and the number of guys who had their hoods up on their hoodies, cinched tight, hunkered so low. It was, for many of them, it was the most terrifying film they had ever seen. And a lot of them were trying to mask some tears at different points.
Awesome.
And I felt very proud.
That's great.
It's a great film. And
better than the book too, I will just point out.
When you watch that film, there's things that most people are just going to miss. They're just going to miss it. And so I have pointed them out on a second watch with my kids, where it's like, okay, so right here, pause. What are you looking at? What do you see? I can just move on. And it was more like they'd already seen it. We'd already discussed it. We'd already gone through it. And I wanted to show them the kind of thing that you have to awaken yourself to.
What are some of those things?
Stuff that's out of focus and swinging on a rear view mirror when somebody's regaining consciousness in a car. It's like, okay, so the first thing he sees regaining consciousness in a car is there's a cross swinging on a mirror. You know, it's like it's the very first thing that's there, and it's like he's coming to, and and most people, it's such an intense scene. Nobody's thinking, oh, this matters as a symbol, right? But it does. The way it's set up, it matters as a symbol. This is this, you know, this regaining, and there's multiple reinforcements of providence, like just providence is just stamped over and over and over, and again through that film, providence and grace. The cross, there's a little prophecy. The kindness of God just gets reinforced. There's an overt argument between your main character as an unbeliever and this woman who saves him as an insertion of providence, who's maintaining that there is a God and he's looking out for us and everything else. And then the film debates that. Yeah, so a good movie postulates a thesis, and my kids know this, and then debates it. The film debates it. And so you'll have different characters with different perspectives, and the film kind of wrestles with their different perspectives, and then frequently one comes out on top. And so the very end is more obvious with I Am Legend, as she discovers the city that she's absolutely believed in and that he did not. And this gate is open to the city, and the first thing you see in the distance is this white church, you know, sitting off in the distance. And there's been all these echoes of crosses and you know, prophecy and so on through the whole film. So it's all there, but it's the kind of thing that when you have existential peril and threats and, you know, dearly beloved but dying dogs and zombies and, you know, terror and all these things, you miss it when you're 14, when you're 15. You're like, it's so visceral.
Yeah.
You know, it's so visceral that you're gonna fly through it. So that's the kind of one that I would hit pause and say, notice that, because I know your heart's pumping right now. And also, if I'm doing that with a younger teenager, you know, a 13-year-old, I would do that to cut some of the tension anyway. I would do a little bit of the dad mediation of something like that, because that one was like letting a kid sip your whiskey. You know, it's like
it's pretty intense.
It's a more intense film. So.
Well, to that point, how do you navigate? I mean, take that I Am Legend, junior high kids are, you know, with their hoodies on or sinking low in their seats. How do you navigate when to introduce or push themes or images that your kid isn't particularly comfortable with yet? So my son is fairly sensitive to villains who are malicious. Not so much nature shows where like a tiger's taking down a deer or anything like that. It's villains who are malicious and evil in their actions towards someone else. Right. And so what are some ways that you found helpful to discuss villains and evil actions to your kids in fictional stories? It's a little bit different than stories that happen in our world where you can, or is it different? Like if something goes down in a fictional world, you can't immediately go to the Bible and say, well, God wasn't cool with this necessarily. If that story they worship, like, you know, there's a whole different mythology there. Yeah. And so how do you think through that?
So that's actually, I was just talking to my kids about this because we recently podcasted about nightmares. We were talking about the Jane Austen one, actually, right? We were talking about and I was talking about one of my big dad bets where I made my son fire the shotgun in Quake. He's 20 now and he's in college. And after this podcast, he cracked up at the dinner table and he was like, I remember that so vividly. He was maybe 5. And at 1:30 in the morning, I made him play a first-person shooter video game with me because he was just being beset with night terrors. And so I downloaded this game and made him just pull the trigger, shooting monsters. Like, you push the button, just pull the trigger. And then we did that for a little, but it was funny. I was like, that was a big dad gamble way back in the day. And I remember being a little sweaty that it might not have been the right one. But it's tough. I mean, you want to navigate it with wisdom because all of our instincts are to protect, right? And shelter. So if you've got a little guy who's really sensitive to villains, what you want to do is you want to make sure you don't show him any stories that lie about villains, kind of really in a sneaky way, and we have a lot of shows that do this, where we give villains incredible godlike powers. Yeah. And so in an adult film, this would be like the Joker, where it's like, man, this guy's omniscient. He's everywhere. He knows everything. Oh, and then it just turns out that he's wrong. Man is basically good. It's like it's just terrifying. He turns out this guy can plant C4 in a hospital in 2.5 minutes. He can plant C4 in every single room. He's everywhere. He's omnipotent. He's omniscient. He knows everything everywhere. And he's just really, really malicious and brutal. We have little kid versions of that where and Christians historically have given Satan way too much power, like way too much cred. And so you want to be careful not to have stories that over empower the villain, and make the villain way more interesting and way stronger and more overpowering than goodness, where darkness is just so daunting. And we do this at a pretty young age. Voldemort is an example of this. If you're really handing Harry Potter to 8-year-olds, which is, what it was, that first book was designed for, that's kind of, man, that's stressful right there. And I'm one who loves a good villain. I really do. A good villain is essential to a story, but you want goodness. You want your Aragorn character, your Gandalf character has to be every bit up to it, every bit in that weight class. Where there's no hesitation that you as a reader, especially as a young reader or a young viewer, have no qualms about hitching your wagon to that guy. You're not just lost at sea in terror. I know you're with Gandalf.
Yeah, I mean, when Aragorn shows up at the Prancing Pony, that's a key moment where the hobbits have just failed over and over again.
And it's like, oh, finally, we got this dude. Yeah, and this guy's, man, he is tough. You're with Aragorn now, and then you've got Gandalf, you got Aragorn. So it's not like, oh, we're set, we're in no danger. But man, you have an absolutely trusted shot caller. You have a trusted guide, right? So you don't mind. The reader really is a hobbit in those stories. The kids, the readers, we're hobbits. And we're along for the ride with Aragorn and Gandalf. We're not meant to relate to Gandalf and Aragorn. We're meant to rest easy in their boat, to rest easy in their caravan, and to really admire them and look up to them and trust them. Now, we follow along the story. We really, really sympathize with the story and the quest and the journey. But I mean, the ruin, the wreckage when Gandalf falls, that's one of the reasons why that's such a big deal when Gandalf falls with the Balrog, is because we feel really lost. But even then, we still have Aragorn. So you want to kind of watch those stories for those little guys. Like, do they have, is their most imprinted memory, is the person they truly admire, the one they're hooked up, to, powerfully, is he up to it? Is the hero up to it? Not just the hero, but the hero's guide. Is the hero's mentor, is the hero's guide up to it, such that they feel safe on that team with that general? Like they're on the right team, and they know that they're not outclassed. They're not outclassed in this combat. So in modern storytelling, we have a fixation with evil. We have a fixation with death. And so we really do tend to over-fascinate on the many, many skill sets and the virtual omnipotence of the darkness. And so it becomes very difficult for little imaginations, to really navigate that, because they have nothing to hang on to but maybe a lottery ticket success, right? Maybe we'll get bailed out by Powerball. They don't have a path laid for them, but no, courage, nobility, bravery, sacrifice, and that's what it takes, and we'll win. Goodness triumphs. Goodness, this is what we do, and this is what we'll win. So it's I don't know if that helps. But
no, it is helpful.
But as he ages, as he gets a little older, you also want to look to empower him more and more and challenge him with stuff. Instead of, don't try to just shelter him from stuff, but try to find those things that will stress him out a little bit, that will actually push him, and then just be there with him and go through it with him.
Well, with the 3 stages of value that you guys mentioned, that was
Yeah.
my next question about, okay, so you have technical value. How well is the thing done? How well was it written, acted, shot,
Yeah.
all of that. And then you have response value. How does it impact me for good or bad? And
Yeah.
objective value. How does God think about it? And are you saying that just because you can have a poor response value to something, that doesn't necessarily mean that you should stop watching it? Or
yeah, sometimes, but it can mean that you should stop now or for the time,
right.
or in this context. So there's times when I'm trying to remember when my kids were younger, a little bit younger. We went through the Harry Potter movies, and I had some real contrarians in my house. Let's just put that way. Shock.
Yeah, I'm shocked. I'm shocked, Nate.
That I had a couple contrarians in my house. So people would be surprised to know that I made children read Harry Potter in my house. It was assigned, and they enjoyed it, But they had classmates who were so into it that they just kind of locked their knees and were like, "Whatever, I'm not going to do this."
Yeah.
But when we watched the movies, and they also were not asking to watch the movies, we watched the movies. We did it. I saved them for summer vacation when we were together. And actually, I think always at the lake. It was kind of funny. We chipped away at them, I think, over 2 years, where we had 1 week up at the lake, and we watched them at the lake in the afternoons, like in the day. Like I was like, my kids were young enough. My younger ones were young enough. I was like, we're going to do this daylight hours. We're going to watch these, and then we're going to go outside, and the sun's still going to be up, and we're all going to, we're not going to go right to bed, and we're going to all have lots of conversations about it and laugh and play and go swimming, and then we're going to have lots of time, to process afterwards. I'm not just going to hit this to my kids' imaginations and tuck them into bed. It's like and you're off on your own, paper boats in the ocean. And so there's times like that where it's like, this is going to push them a little bit, but I'm going to try to be wise with where I position it. So in terms of that response value, you can say, not now, not at midnight, not, we're not going to do this in the dark, not with the 10-year-old, not with the 8-year-old. I've got stuff that some of my kids watch, and I'll have, my 2 older girls will watch a show, and their little sister doesn't, and they're chipping away at it, and I'm talking to them about it. We're having conversations, but the 12-year-old is not watching that show. She's working on something else. And I think it's really important to kind of differentiate like that. And I'm not going to do it all perfectly, but I am absolutely going to try to do it with wisdom, as we march through. And with the older kids especially, I try to be careful about not over filtering. So I try to start turning filters off. So, and not all of them, it's like, I'm not ever turning the nudity back on. But there's aspects of language and things like that I know they're not going to approve of, or that they don't like, that I turn back on, because I need them to have a certain level of resistance. Like they have to have a certain amount of calluses and resistance to,
because their first coworker is not going to have those filters. So
because my son's going to play baseball, and his teammates are, they're going to run their mouths, and I need him to, not be just melting down like a bubble child. He needs to have an immune system. So it's not because he's tolerating it. It's because I need him to have been like, ooh, and shocked. And we talk a little bit, and this is what we do. And people talk like that, and so on. So there's all sorts of variation of wisdom, and not now, not yet. Let's try it now. Let's try it today. My wife and I have lots of text exchanges where she'll send me a title with a question mark, and I'll be like, not quite yet. Not just yet. Or no, let's do something with all 5 of them today. Maybe with the older, the older 4, but not with the younger one. There's all sorts of variation as we navigate it. So I think that's all part of being active and having your brain turned on as a parent too. And do the extra Google to know what's in there. Check your filtering services. As a dad, I know the temptation to not have those subscription services to the filtering platforms. It's like, I don't want to have to pay for that. But just, what? Suck it up is generally how I feel. It's like, I'm going to pay that extra whatever it is now, $7.99 a month in order to be able to, you know, open up the doors to more content and more discussions and more growth as a family, more communion over art, because there'd just be a ton of things we could never discuss. I've been watching the show Turn with my kids, which is a War for Independence spy show. And we've been kind of chipping away. And that's just...
Well, that was my next question. I mean, what are TV shows or movies that you've enjoyed watching with your kids that had the most maybe interesting or engaging dialogue as a family afterward?
Stranger Things was great. That one was really great. And that one pushed the 12-year-old definitely. You know, like that's, you know, that was an afternoon watcher. We were not doing that on Friday nights. We were doing that, you know, weekend afternoons. But there's a lot of conversation around that. Chernobyl was one. Arrival. Chernobyl surprises people that we watched. Arrival as a film was one that actually resulted in a ton of conversation. I already mentioned Don't Look Up. That one, there was a ton. And also there's a ton of stuff that we just do where it's like, this is communion, right? That we're sitting down to a meal, right? It's not always like, let's push you, children. Let's push you. So we're going to watch Flyboys. You know, we're going to watch fun World War I movie. And then we're going to talk about World War I and the strangeness of that historical period. And, you know, and things like that. Sports movies, you know, Hoosiers. There's plenty of shows that are just like, man, that was a good meal. That was just a good meal. And we're going to talk about the characters and the character arc and what was beautiful about it or what was resonant about it. And then there's other things that are a little more heady, you know, that are reaching a little more aggressively. Children of Men. My older kids all really enjoy No Country for Old Men. They all really liked I Am Legend a lot. But all these come with, you know, they all come with the comment that, you know, heavily filtered. I'm actually going to open on my phone. I keep a list, a notepad whenever I think of a movie, to try to.
Can you send me that note after we're off this call?
No, I won't. Cinderella Man, you know, Gladiator, those are up there. Edge of Tomorrow is an example of like a popcorn movie. Last of the Mohicans, King's Speech, Stranger Than Fiction,
Master and Commander,
Finding Neverland. Woman in Gold was actually a really interesting one conversationally, just, you know, post-Holocaust legal fight. You know, it's like, it was just kind of a brooding drama. It's not, they want to sit down and have oftentimes a really funny action comedy. Like, let's have some fun. Let's have a fun meal and chat, or let's have a show like Turn, like I mentioned, a spy show. And well, plenty of filters there. And let's watch something that's got this suspense and complexity that goes. But then every now and then I'll shock them with something like the Royal Tenenbaums, and they'll just be like, "What was that?" Like, that, children, was Wesley Anderson and his ethos. But they actually really did enjoy that one. So on the edge of like scary or things like Ghost in the Darkness. Okay, these man-eating lions, Hunt for the Wilder People. They just really, really loved. Newer one was Free Guy. That's available cleaned. One they hated a lot that I love is Baby Mama. They just didn't want to think about childbirth at all.
Oh.
And I was like, you know what, kids, you were right. That was much funnier for your mom than I. That was hilarious for us because we went to a birthing class and that was the funniest movie ever after you've been to a birthing class, but this was not funny for children. That was a dad whiff on that one, but it was really funny. The Prestige is another one, but these are all things that skew towards my older kids. You know, my teenagers. Moneyball, Seabiscuit, Social Network, and that one we talked a lot with Social Network. We talked about the way Fincher. They have not watched a lot of Fincher, but the way Fincher made this as a film about serial killers. So it's structured like it's about a murderer, and it's about the murder of West.
Is that with Tom Hanks?
Social Network? No, that's with Jesse Eisenberg. And
oh, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So that kind of thing. Then there's plenty on here that we've not all watched because I don't have filters for them. Like, I can't find the filters, so I just have them there, and I constantly check to see if filters have come up, and they, you know, if they haven't. Amistad is one, for example. They've seen The Last Samurai. Lost in Translation doesn't have filters, but it's an amazing one. I keep going back and forth on Once Upon a Time in Hollywood because I really admire the film, but I think they'd be mostly bored.
Mm.
So,
I just watched that. Yeah.
It's like that's for my older kids. My actually two of my older three have watched Nightcrawler as part of a independent study, which is an interesting, very academic, interesting one. But again, not something I'd do with the rest of them. So the Swing Kids, another historical one, is way up there. There's a ton, and then there's things like Man on Fire. I want to show Man on Fire, but that one's still not got filters, and I need filters to get there.
What about after you watch a movie, just you and your wife? I mean, are you talking about the movie afterwards in any kind of similar way, or is it more just, you know what, we developed these sort of...
We have a pretty strong, we have a pretty strong dialect, a pretty strong shared dialect at this point.
Okay.
So it's, we love to watch stuff together, but there's definitely things she wants to watch that I'm like, really? We're going to do? Okay, fine. We'll do this. And then I can enjoy it. I'm going to engage with it. We just watched The Gilded Age of the show. We chipped away. And I enjoy that as a piece of artistic construction, the attempt there. And so we're talking a lot there about performance and sympathy, and we spend a lot of time on the technical side because she's so close to a lot of my work and my conversations around production and casting and relationships and that kind of stuff. There's a lot more that we talk about on the technical piece. So from sets and production to casting and directors of photography and those things, we'll end up spending a lot more time there.
I find those character moments though do tend to come up where you think, wow, when that person did that, that's very real. We've seen that here, and here in our lives. That I feel like with Christy, that's what comes up.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, exactly. When it's like, I know who that person is.
Yeah.
That's, or when you say that's not a real person. So we have, my wife and I have a few big artistic disagreements, but really only one left, I think. Maybe two, but she still likes the novels of one Ayn Rand. I cannot abide them, but I've only ever almost finished one. So, but I don't actually know that she likes them so much as that she likes the memory of having liked them. But there's, and then East of Eden. We both love Steinbeck, and she likes East of Eden, and I don't because because there's what's her face is so fake.
The villain.
Yeah, I block her name out. What's her name?
I want to say Callie. Something.
Nope,
I'm
some terrible
up.
woman.
Yeah.
The terrible woman in East of Eden. She really, Steinbeck's a genius, but so we have that disagreement. That's about it. The rest of the time, we're pretty much in alignment as we work through stuff. But most of the time, we're both pretty tired, and so by the time we have a chance to watch something together, it's like almost going to sit on the couch, and I might have a drink, and she might just sleep. She could just tuck in under my arm and sleep, and afterwards she'll be like, "How was it?" Especially if it's something that I have to watch, like it's something I have to watch for work, then that could be how it goes. So, but it is really interesting because but my kids are so spread. It's really funny because we've spent so much time watching and talking about, Pixar and watching and talking about little kid movies. And I'm busting out, old school, like old classics and, showing them North by Northwest. And
we just showed them Candle Shoe, which was kind of funny.
And doing that kind of thing. So it's really funny to me now that I've aged them up into this more intense space where it's like, well, I'm, my kids now, and I talk about my kids, my son's home from college right now. I'm watching movies with, mostly with 12 through 20, it's like I'm watching with 15, 17, 18 and 20. So when I rattle off, movies that are a little more, rough around the edges, it's like, well, I have to kind of accommodate for the 12-year-old and figure out how we're filtering or working around her and making sure that we're still engaging with her level, with her cousins and her friends and that kind of stuff. But when it's a 17, 18, 20 or wanting to watch something and they're all feeling frothy and wanting to be mentally challenged and engaged. They're all looking for that. Like, let's really get a chunk of meat. Let's really work through something. Then it's like, man, should I call? What do I do with my youngest right now? Like, do I call my sister? Like, she can go watch something with her cousin right now, or what do we do? She still really wants to be at the group though, so I try to find those things that are like mid ground family moments that we can all hang out and watch together, and we still do a pretty good job. Dune was probably the last one that was like all of us together consuming something new and weird and strange. And I really enjoyed the conversations after that one. But it's really interesting. I think the journey of it, it's terrible to sound like such a relativist, but I think the journey of it is the most important thing. and that they relate to you as their partner on this road. That they are thinking of you as somebody that they go on this journey with, as opposed to whatever social media commands them to have watched next. And I think that's where it's most dangerous as they get older.
That's good.
And so the real win here, David, is that we got to talk to you, and that we scored
a sweet new soundtrack. Yes, let's go.
Ghost of a King on the Road.
Man, it was so good. Good to hear your thoughts on this stuff. I think about all the time, but I'm just like, what do I do here?
And it's funny, you have a 6-year-old, right? You said 6, almost 7.
Yeah.
So, you have all the time in the world. Don't worry, they grow up slow. They grow up so slow. Don't worry, he won't be 15 in a heartbeat. I promise.
Is
that sarcasm?
Yes.
Okay.
You're going to be watching Robin Hood for the rest of your life.
Yeah, you're going to be watching. Yeah, exactly. Robin Hood and Little John running through the forest the rest of your life for sure. It is. When do we get new music here, David? I'm impatient.
So I've actually got.
I know we just got new music. I want new music.
Yeah, I know. So I'm currently starting to write for the next album. We have plans to start recording in October for another full-length album. We'll probably, the first song from that album will probably be close-ish to the first of the year. I'm looking at 15 titles on sticky notes on my wall right now for stuff I'm chasing down. Fun. And what is in my headspace currently that I think the album might lean towards, this could be totally different in 6 months, but just the tension of being a human being in an increasingly digital space. And how do you navigate that just as a human, but also as a believer in a way that leads to an abundant life. And
interesting.
And
clashing with modernism here.
A little bit. I mean,
is the album going to sound entirely like Radiohead?
No. Did our last album sound like Radiohead?
No, I'm just saying that theme.
The theme.
That theme especially just sounds like you could go down a little Radiohead.
Yeah, totally.
David, for our listeners who, if there are any who have not listened to you, where should they start? What album? Besides the one that's at the front of the Stories of Soul Food Pod.
You know what? Ghost of a King seems to be the best entry.
It's a great gateway drug.
Yeah. So Ghost of a King is an album we put out in 2016. You can find it everywhere music is. And this latest one, Blue Flower, was basically C.S. Lewis's autobiography, Surprised by Joy. The theme of that set to music, and did a podcast. So we have a podcast on. I might try to talk you guys in on letting me publish this on my podcast as well. But we have done. Yes, nice. We have a podcast called the Grey Havens Podcast, and we started it with just diving into song by song breakdown from the last album, Blue Flower. But that's what we're up to. That's what we're working on. So I'm actually heading into about a 3-month stretch of writing where I'm off the road. So yeah, and hopefully
I'll
some
try
good
not to
songs
be
will come
too
from it.
hurt. I mean, when you were publishing tour dates and I saw that you were nowhere near Moscow, Idaho, I just thought it's almost like
Yeah.
you're doing it on purpose.
But me
There's
and
some
the
great
other
venues. The
3 million
Gorge.
bands.
I know that Moscow, Idaho is on everyone's way to everywhere. So I don't understand why you couldn't stop by. Someday we'll get you back. We'll get you back. We got you once, and I shouldn't be ungrateful. We got you the one time.
We'll do it again.
We'll get you again
Definitely.
for sure.
Yeah.
The so Ghost of a King is a great intro, and then you have She Waits as a single is one of my favorites. And
Yeah, that's a
that
good song.
album. Well, what's the title of that album?
It's called She Waits.
That's what I thought. I was like, oh gosh, should it have a different title?
Yeah.
Like, no, that's the sing. That one's fantastic. And then Blue Flower. Are there any others that are snuck in there that I've?
There are, yeah. So we have. There's a couple others you can check in our history. Where Eyes Don't Go and Fire and Stone. Those are very early days Grey Havens.
Right.
But
Those
I would
are the
say,
older ones. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say the last 3 are most representative of kind of where we've found our sound. But but yeah, that's kind of the.
They're all really good.
The update.
They're really good. And if you want to check, just listen to our new bumper.
Yeah. Just start back
I love
at
it.
the beginning.
Okay, I just got to ask before we sign off here. Did I hear correctly on are you working on a series called King David?
I'm working on a series about King David, not called King David. Yes.
Okay.
I am, and I'm excited.
Need more news.
I will ask no more.
It's going to be it has been greenlit.
Yes.
Has it really?
It has. That's all I can say right now.
Wow. Exciting.
Wow.
But it has been.
Are the scripts all written?
The first 10. So
that's amazing.
I wrote 1, 2, and 10. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very fun.
And
incredibly exciting.
Yeah, it is there's a lot of work left. There's a lot of work left to do, but I am very fond.
Can you say if you're directing it?
No, I can't say that. I don't expect to be.
Okay.
Because I expect to be let's just put it this way. I expect to be heavily involved, but I don't expect to be directing it because I don't think I should be. So I don't think I want it's a big giant swords and sandals thing. And I have no swords and sandals experience. So I expect to learn a lot. I would love to maybe by a later episode I could be directing it, but I'm definitely not feeling equipped to or co-directing or helping. I could be involved show running, producing, but co-directing I wouldn't want to try to even do that. I think that I would be the wrong guy to tap for that because I want it to be as excellent as possible. And so what that means is those early episodes you really need a veteran of that particular style of work. So I really do like it a lot, and I really hope to like it a lot when it's all done. That's how
Can't wait.
That's how I feel about every book idea when I start. I'm like, I love this. I hope I still love it in a year.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so that one I'm grinding on, a couple others as well. So there's a number of irons in the fire. I've got a chapter of Ashdown Burial's book 4 just sitting here almost ready to go, and I can't quite get there because I keep getting hit with new TV stuff I have to do or quick drafts or other things. So it's, there's writing to do. And I've got a nonfiction book to finish for Brian Cole, who's sitting right here.
Woo.
He could rub in the fact that I've blown past that deadline. Like, man.
What are deadlines anyway?
What are
They're more
deadlines?
like guidelines.
Yes. Are they even those? Are they even guidelines? Deadlines are like yellow stripes painted on roads 50 years ago.
There you go.
Are they even there?
Yeah. No.
So yeah, I've got a nonfiction book to finish, and then I've got this novel to finish, and then I'll just be up to my eyeballs in a bunch of TV work. So
exciting,
very excited. And of course, every Tuesday, I'll be hopefully talking to Brian about stories and soul food, and occasionally talking to you, David, whenever you send me a heckling text saying, but hey, I have a question. So standing invite whenever you want to kibitz or argue or just, talk.
Love it.
Meanwhile, everybody else, buy his music. Do it now. Don't be one of those chumps. This is one of those personal things. don't be one of those chumps who streams music. Go buy his albums. I'm an artist.
Yeah.
I still buy albums. I do this. I do it on principle. And now, of course, it's very old school of me to go to iTunes and buy an album on iTunes.
No, I know. I didn't know I was a chump, but here I am.
Yes. buy the albums. Buy them. There you go. You've heard it from me.
There we go.
Yeah.
It's like,
Well, thank you guys so much.
Buy them. That's already. Yeah. Thanks, David. Until next time.
Yeah. Peace out, guys.
Cheers.
To see me on for trace the riverside, but restlessness.
I wanted to thank you all for supporting the Stories Are Soul Food podcast. And I also wanted to tell you about Canon Plus some more. In fact, we got a special offer just for Stories Are Soul Food subscribers. Now, for a limited time, you can get a month subscription to Canon Plus for 99 cents with the code specially created for you guys by the Canon Plus team. The code is SASF99. So that is SASF99. It only works if you're a first-time user, and it only works at mycanonplus.com. I want to tell you about some new soul food, which is on Canon Plus now. This is a new documentary from Rebecca Merkel called Eve in Exile, and it has already released just this month on May 6th. Becca is, of course, Nate's sister, and she's a friend of the SASFA podcast, or at least we assume she's a friend, because she was a guest on episode 12 back in the early days to talk about building a library for your kids. So, Becca's documentary, Eve in Exile, tells the story of the failure of feminism in America. Basically, how American feminists have tried to pull down their houses with their own hands. But it's not a shrill political commentary with a bunch of Twitter hot takes. It's actually an attempt to get a conversation started around a simple question. Feminism promised that everything would get better for American women, but women are unhappier than ever based on their historic use of antidepressants. So if feminism was a scam, the question is, what's next? That's where things get kind of fun. Becca points out that whether you're someone who thinks pantsuits look kind of cool, or someone who thinks Little House on the Prairie style jumpers are much better, or someone who thinks they could go to a Regency-era ball with Elizabeth Bennet and her sisters, every one of those people is making the same fundamental mistake. They're reading personal taste into the question of how we recover from feminism. So how do we approach it? Kristen and I watched the doc, and one thing that Becca says is that if she could choose any time to live in history, it would be this time. Yeah, we're standing in rubble, but that means we have an opportunity to rebuild from scratch, and that is pretty exciting. Anyways, Becca's doc gives inspirational guidance on the way forward for Christian women. As I said, it's only available on Canon Plus. One more time, let me mention the code. If you're a first-time Canon Plus subscriber, then you can get access to Canon Plus for just 99 cents with the code SASF99. That's at mycanonplus.com. Watch the documentary, listen to the Green Ember audiobooks, all our other children's books, sermons, podcasts, good old video resources. I think you'll really benefit from a Canon Plus subscription, and here's a chance for you guys to jump on it for just 99 cents. Please do check out Canon Plus.